Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are around the world. I'm John Rassant of CoMotion, and I am truly delighted and honored to welcome the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, who will talk to us this morning at this really rather extraordinary moment for transportation, mobility, and infrastructure in the United States. He's joined by our very good friend, Gabe Klein, the founder of Citify. And we're just delighted to welcome you, Secretary Buttigieg. Gabe, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing you.
Well, good morning, and thanks a lot for the chance to be with you, and appreciate you bringing us all together. And want to recognize a lot of colleagues in public service in the region. Mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, Miami Mayor Suarez, who's also playing such an important role in leadership as Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Florida Department of Transportation Secretary Kevin Tebow, and great to be reunited with Gabe, who has been a very important figure in the 101 process that I went through, as all new secretaries do with the transition team, and whose reputation precedes him in transportation innovation. So I know that I am among like-minded people who have a heart and mind for transportation innovation. I want to thank everybody here for what you're doing to improve transportation in the US and globally. This, I'm convinced, is a moment we're living through that is unlike anything that's happened in our lifetimes. It's kind of once in a generation, once in a century even, season for change and creativity. And that was true even before the pandemic. But the pandemic, of course, brought more challenges and in some ways more insights and possibilities as well. I know there are companies, there are public sector officials, there are nonprofits at this conference who have been working for a long time in concert to deliver innovative and effective first mile, last mile solutions, using drones to deliver medical supplies, harnessing new mobility data to help the public sector make more informed decisions. And I'm excited for our department to be a partner in this kind of work. I'm also delighted to know that there's international presence at this event. The US leads the world in so many ways, but not always when it comes to transportation. High-speed trains, well-resourced public transit, highway safety are all examples of areas where the US can learn a lot from partners and counterparts abroad. I think it's very important as we gather to talk about innovation that we think about innovation not as an end in itself, not as the purpose, but as a means to achieve a purpose. And for us, the purposes that drive this department are safety, climate, equity, and economic opportunity. And we want to make sure that we're driving the right kind of innovations that back that public purpose. You'll be seeing more coming out of our department soon. We'll be releasing a vision and a number of purpose-driven opportunities coming out of US DOT related to innovation, and hope that you'll respond and get engaged in that. We also recently released a request for information, and this RFI is inviting members of the public, organizers, academics, data analysts, others, people like you and others, to inform the way that we analyze and measure transportation equity. And I hope you'll look into that and submit ideas. And of course, nowhere is innovation more urgently needed than in tackling our country's climate crisis. We know that in the US and in many places around the world, transportation is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. To me, that amounts to a challenge to be the biggest part of the solution. And it means recognizing that every infrastructure choice we make is inevitably a climate decision as well. Now, for us, a big part of how we think we can get that done is in the President's American Jobs Plan, which we view as a generational opportunity to meet the moment and make sure that we win the future. It's resources, for sure, the dollar figures commanding a lot of public media attention, but also, equally importantly, policies that can modernize every dimension of our transportation system, including sparking an electric vehicle revolution in the US, seeing to it that electric vehicles are not a luxury item, but something affordable for everybody, and backing them up with a national network of electric vehicle chargers, while we seek to capture the gains that are available for families and businesses from fuel savings, especially in rural areas, as well as in big cities. And of course, we need to accelerate our transition towards zero emission transit vehicles, which are a big part of the puzzle. Of course, our zero emission vehicles ultimately are only as clean as the energy that goes into them. So we're also working to transition to a clean energy future, and the American Jobs Plan would do more for that than any law to date. Part of it's making sure that vehicles are more efficient, but part of it's giving people more alternatives to get around without a car. I've often said you shouldn't have to drag 2 tons of metal with you everywhere you go in order to go through life. And it's part of why our vision doubles funding for transit and invests to improve road design to make it easier and safer and more efficient for people who are walking or biking or using a wheelchair. And the best thing about this vision is the jobs that we think we can create while we're at it. Most of which, in fact, are available to Americans whether you have a college degree or not. And I know that we're speaking in the context of what Miami has seen in terms of the need and the gain, especially around climate. A wonderful city with a center of culture and innovation, extraordinary energy, but also an extraordinary vulnerability to rising waters and to the changes that are coming our way, no matter how good we are at heading off the climate challenge, which is why resilience is such an important part of our vision as well. So I just wanted to mention some of those things that we're pursuing at the department and in the administration, because they fit in such important ways with the work that people on this call are doing, and call for the sort of innovation that will shape the times we live in, and that I know will emerge from the kinds of conversations that you're having here at CoMotion.
That's great. Thank you, Secretary Pete. For me, it's thrilling to get to be with you again and talk today. And as usual, in typical Secretary Pete fashion, he already answered all my questions in his opening statement, so I've made up all new questions. But seriously, you said, and I think it's very accurate, you know, America is a leader internationally in terms of technological innovation in transportation, in mobility services, and I would go so far as to say in terms of business models for mobility services. But we do struggle a bit on the infrastructure shifts to match. And I think on the positive outcomes, right? Those positive social outcomes, including everybody. So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on, you know, how you see us looking to harness this power of innovation more for social good to meet President Biden's, you know, four pillars, all which I think will help us move beyond this pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's critically important to think about what we're solving for. Again, innovation never for its own sake, but in order to make life better and more equitable in this country. And I think when people look at questions like civil rights or equity, they're usually, if they're wondering where in the federal government to find the work going on, they would assume the Department of Justice. There's a lot of important work going on there. But one of the things I've found since taking the seat is just how much of the work that we do at the Department of Transportation really bears on these questions, whether we acknowledge it or not. This is even more true for people in the private sector and local and nonprofit world who are working these issues. Being able to get to where you need to go equity is a key and foundational element of well-being. When you don't have it, nothing else works. And this is something that I think needs to be built into the problem statements that we're trying to collect through this RFI from stakeholders and communities. It's something we need to make sure that our data reflect. And sometimes we haven't done a great job of that, whether it's who is served by the resources we're funding, or even just who gets in on the business opportunities to help literally build the infrastructure we're seeking to create. I got a monitor over here that can tell me where every aircraft is in the national airspace, but I don't have one that can tell me exactly where some of our dollars are going from an equity lens. And these are the kinds of things I think we need to work on. So some of it's just data and having a clearer picture of what the realities are. Some of it's ensuring that we are affecting people's lives in a positive fashion. And a lot of it's tearing down obstacles. You look at technologies like automation, could tear down, for example, quickly tear down obstacles for Americans with disabilities and for seniors. And at the same time can also exacerbate those inequities if we're not smart about how we deploy them. So these are exactly the things that I know that so many in our audience today work on. And USDOT, we're not going to cook up all the solutions here in this building, but we want to be an ally and a resource for those who do.
That's great. Thank you. And, you know, speaking of the pandemic and equity and sort of foundational technologies, the transit system is a foundational technology that actually powers a lot of other business models, particularly first and last mile. And, you know, counties and cities like Miami are working to overcome the negative impact of the pandemic on their transit systems, when a lot of lower income people in particular have relied on them throughout the pandemic. So like in Miami-Dade, they have this $4 billion SMART plan. They're actually doubling down in a place that's pretty car-centric to build out a more complete system. So like, what words of wisdom do you have for city leaders that are trying to take the long view and building public support for the investments in these foundational shared mobility systems?
Well, I think it's important to maintain the courage of your convictions on this, but do it with a lot of listening. I mean, this story is repeated in many communities, and it reminds me of our own Complete Streets work when I was mayor of South Bend. We did dozens of engagements and genuinely reshaped our plan based on the community input that we got, so it was better than it would have been if we had tried to jam it through. But just as importantly, we continued to insist on why the future didn't have to look exactly like the past. And when it comes to the opportunities that transit's going to unlock, leaders need to make it clear that that benefits everybody, even somebody who right now doesn't think transit is for them, even somebody who will never use that transit asset, but might operate a small business close to one of those routes. And I think it's important that we show an understanding of how that's integrated with everything else. And again, I know local leaders are ahead of the curve. If the org chart of the executive branch puts housing and transportation in two different departments, but I'm speaking to my counterparts at HUD, for example, all the time, knowing that mayors and community advocates don't think about transportation one month and then housing the next month, but understand from the perspective of affordability as well as livability and opportunity that all these things are connected, that in the family budget, housing and transportation sit right next to each other and often depend on each other. And so these are the kinds of things I think we need to make sure we're paying close attention to. And leaders should not just focus on replicating the status quo, but getting us to where we need to be. Now, federally, we've done everything we can to support transit because we've seen the blows that they've taken to revenue because of the pandemic. That's part of why the American Rescue Plan was so important, saving routes, saving jobs. But now we got to look ahead. And again, one of the things that makes me so excited about the president's vision is that the jobs plan has resources to help back up those local leaders who are doing the work.
And you know, during the transition, like speaking of foundational technologies, I'm thinking about electrification of the entire system. And during the transition, I was amazed at how much you already understood about the details of transportation policy, funding, and the potential of like big investments in the right infrastructure with a systems level approach to it. So, you know, this is very much a once in a lifetime opportunity, as you said, to make a shift to a new economy and transportation system. Electrification is really complex. Like these can be 5 to 10 year processes. There's planning and pre-development. You know, how should cities be thinking about that and that process and using this funding? And how can every person at the conference think about their role in supporting you and the administration in this shift?
So our view is that, you know, an electric vehicle transformation will happen. It just will. And the fundamental questions are, will it be led by America? Will it be equitable? And will it happen in time? And those questions are very much in doubt. And so that's what we've got to accelerate. Part of that's about range anxiety. So figuring out how to make sure charging infrastructure is where it needs to be. We've developed an alternative fuel corridor process to help define that national network. We're working right now to get the funds, but ultimately it's of course at the community level that you're going to understand where these resources need to go. A lot of it's shifting it's cultural. It's shifting this idea that these are a luxury item, or that these only make sense in certain kinds of dense urban areas, and making clear that they can benefit people across the country. But we've also got to make sure that they're not a luxury item with the right kind of policies. And we've got to continue to make sure we have the right kind of grid to back them up too, which is a national and federal challenge, but again, often plays out actually at the local and regional level. The other thing I would mention is that cities can lead by example. creating an electrification friendly neighborhood or community or corridor, making sure that fleets, even just city fleets, are moving in the right direction, can go a long way toward establishing that this is not some futuristic pie in the sky thing. This is technology that exists today, and so much depends on even a few years worth of acceleration in how quickly it's adopted.
Thank you for that. And I think leading by example is so important and something every city listening should be thinking about. Last quick question, because I know you have to run. You've been spotted around our mutual city of Washington, D.C., riding your bike, which is great. Transportation is fun. It should be active when possible. There's health impact. So I'm just curious, like, for the first few months as you're biking around DC, seeing the city at human scale, like what did you learn about transportation? How has it influenced your views as transportation secretary?
It connects you to your surroundings. So in addition to the congestion benefits, and which admittedly is a little different on my part because I have the same security detail whether I'm on two wheels or sitting in the back seat, but it's still worth it for me to be on two wheels at least some of the time, because you just have a better sense of what's happening around you. One of the first things I think a lot of people who bike around notice is the topography of your city. Little hills that you literally didn't know were there when you drove or were driven on them, but you definitely notice when you pedal up them. But more importantly, you notice the character of neighborhoods. You notice where infrastructure is in good shape or in weak shape, how much design matters. A subtle shift in the way that a lane marking works or the way vehicles and pedestrians are routed can make all the difference, including a life or death difference from a safety perspective. And you think about visibility. Can cars, bicycles, pedestrians, wheelchairs, motorcycles see each other? Again, lives depend on that. And you just view it differently when you're out and about in that way. So I think active transportation has enormous potential for public health, for congestion, for climate, and just for community energy, for people to be more connected to the spaces in between where you work, where you live, where you were, and where you're headed. And there's few better ways to do it than to do it on two wheels.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't have said it that eloquently. Secretary Pete, thank you on behalf of the crowd at CoMotion, everybody watching, and John and team. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a very successful year, and I hope the American Jobs Plan passes soon.
Well, thank you, Kid. Thank you, John. It's a real honor to be with you, and I'm just so excited about the work you all are doing.
Thank you very much. And we everybody in our ecosystem really supports you in this unprecedented moment and want you to succeed. It's for the good of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.